While we were celebrating drafting Perion Winfrey, and while some of us were either upset or celebrating the drafting of a kicker in the fourth round, there's something that slid under the radar that could have more implications on this year's roster than I think any of those picks. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about taking Jerome Ford in the fifth round. Now, this does not mean that somebody is on their way out or anything, and I'm not trying to act like that's the case, but it does mean that you have a peculiar situation there in the running back room throughout camp, at least, right? Because now you have Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. That's already a full running back room. You add in D'Ernest Johnson, who showed last year he could be a starting running back. And then you throw in guys like Demetric Felton, who showed some flashes. John Kelly, who is he still with the team? I don't know, but he looked pretty good in preseason and training camp last year and in some spots throughout the year. And then also, you drafted Jerome Ford in the fifth round, and Jerome Ford is no scrub. He's a University of Alabama transfer, was the best player on Cincinnati on the offensive side of the ball for a playoff team, a college football playoff team from a non-Power 5 school. This is not like some scrub, right? Like, this dude could easily make a roster. I think if any other team would took him, he would easily be on somebody's 53-man roster. Like, I don't think he was ever a guy that had to worry about that. But he fell to the fifth round. The Browns took him. And, now he's in this situation where, like, you can forget about starting, but, like, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, D'Ernest Johnson, most teams keep 3. The Browns kept 4 last year with Demetric Felton. Are they going to keep 5? I don't know. They can't keep all 5. Somebody's got to go at some point or change positions. Now, what does this mean for the makeup of the room? Now, this is something that I've said for a while now, and I don't think it matters as much for this year as much as it matters for the next few years. And what I mean by that is you got to look at where Andrew Berry takes players, because sometimes that can tell you that there's a little bit of a plan forming up here, right? And I know some people got mad at me earlier when I was doing my drafts where I would take a Jerome Ford or was with the Dalvin Cook's brother's name. I'm sorry, I forgot his first name, but I would take one of those two guys because I think those were the two running back prospects in the range of where you would take it. And also, you have a situation here where Kareem Hunt's on the last year of his deal, and Nick Chubb is on he has 2 more years left in his deal. And let's face it here, running backs age fast, right? A 28-year-old running back is not like a dude you want to be putting everything behind, even if they're elite like Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt has been. And that's where the Browns are at right now. I think Kareem Hunt's actually close to 28. Nick Chubb's around like 26 or something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong here. But that's where the Browns are at. So what's Jerome Ford's plan for this year and what's possible for him this year? I think the Browns are going to want to keep Jerome Ford on the practice squad. That's going to be very difficult because, again, I think Jerome Ford, if drafted by a lot of other teams in the fifth round, he would probably make their 53-man roster, which means if they see Jerome Ford coming around that waiver wire, it's going to be hard to get him on the practice squad and get that practice squad member protected, right? Because the way the practice squad works, for those who don't know, you get released from your contract. You have to go through the waiver wire, which means all 32 teams get a fair shot at picking up that contract if they want to. And then after that, you can then be claimed on the practice squad. So beforehand, you cannot. And that's kind of the situation that makes it difficult, right? Because you're not sure if you can get away with putting Jerome Ford on the practice squad this year, because again, this is so recent, people had him on this draft board. And then you have to ask yourselves, okay, how can the Browns get creative on it, right? You cannot cut Nick Chubb and you wouldn't consider putting Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt for any reason on the practice squad. But maybe you can look at somebody like a Demetric Felton. Could you get away with putting Demetric Felton on the practice squad? Or do you just outright cut Demetric Felton. I think they want to keep Demetric Felton around. I think they like what he can do. But again, it's like you have to have this weird balancing act now between the running backs, because you have 5 in here, 5 running backs in your room. And again, this is a blessing, but this is also a problem. You have 5 running backs. All 5 of them can get some time, which is funny to me because Jerome Ford left Alabama because of stuff like this, right? He left Alabama because he was in a room that was like 8 deep and was never going to get a chance to play, or even if he did, it was never going to be as the number 1 guy. He transfers to Cincinnati to be the number 1 guy, was great as the number 1 guy, gets drafted, and he goes to the Alabama when it comes to running back rooms of the NFL, which is the Cleveland Browns, which is to say we have 3 dudes who could start. And then there's Demetric Felton, who we drafted last year. So, you know, you have to ask yourself that question. Now, another question we can ask ourselves is, do they think Demetric Felton and Jerome Ford eventually, and I'm not saying they're going to be the same level of player, I think that would be a ridiculous expectation, but do they think they can fill those roles sufficiently enough to be the eventual replacements for Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt once their contracts expire, right? Like, what is the long-term plan? And I don't think they took Jerome Ford with a long-term plan, but they might develop a long-term plan while they have Jerome Ford if he proves to be a really good NFL player. And I think he's going to be a good running back in the NFL. I think he's going to be a starting level running back, which begs the question on what you do with him. Now, there are situations like this that happened. I think Shaun Wade last year with the Ravens, where the Ravens took him. He looked good in camp, but the Ravens felt like they didn't need any more corners, so they traded him to New England to get their pick back. Maybe that's something that happens with Jerome Ford, but him being a running back, that kind of changes the value on things. I just don't see that being in the cards for Jerome Ford. But basically, the options in order to keep your 5th round pick on this roster is, 1, you cut him, hope he clears waivers, and get him on the practice squad. And then once one of those running backs contracts, and next year you can pop in Jerome Ford and have a replacement ready to go. 2, you keep Jerome Ford on the active roster, but you cut Demetric Felton and hope you can swing him back on the practice squad. Now, remember, once you get a guy on the practice squad, I believe you get 4 protected spots, which means that nobody can claim the player that you have on the practice squad. Because, again, for those who don't know, if you're on the practice squad, if any other team in the NFL decides that they want to give you a spot on their active roster, then you can be taken from anybody's practice squad. So they have 4 players that can be protected. I would guarantee that if one of these running backs do get cut, they will be one of those protected practice squad members. But again, it's interesting, right? Like, what in the world can they do there, right? Are they going to trade Kareem Hunt? I would doubt that. But what if Jerome Ford flashes really hard in camp and maybe Kareem Hunt, which I 100% do not expect, but what if Kareem Hunt comes out the gates a little slow, right? Maybe they see that they could actually upgrade there, which would be a weird thing to say. But again, it's something that's not 100% out of possibility. It's just something that is not very likely. Again, when you have 5 running backs that, you know, none of these guys, well, I mean, some of these are technically undrafted, but none of these guys are guys that are just here for a flyer, right? Like, these are guys who we have seen the role, the value they could provide, and the depth that they could provide. And, you know, we've been there with these guys, right? Demetric Felton, we've seen him flash in the NFL, in a real NFL game. We've seen D'Ernest Johnson win the Browns 2 football games last year, right? Like, good running back. And now you draft Jerome Ford, who looked really great at Cincinnati, and you see if that can work. And what if that does work? And all of a sudden you have 5 really good running backs and maybe 4 spots to keep them. How does that work out? Who's the odd man out? That's a very, very, very difficult question to answer right now. but it's one that I think is going to become a bigger question as the days go on in camp, right? Once we see what Jerome Ford can do, right? Let's say if Demetric Felton takes a jump and Jerome Ford looks good, and all of a sudden we're looking at 5 running backs that look really good in camp. What in the world do you do? Seriously, what in the world do you do if you're Andrew Berry? Now, again, it's one of those good problems, but it's a problem nonetheless, because you might be giving up a good player to a rival, right? Because Baltimore is going to be looking at Cleveland and what's going to happen with that running back room closely, because they might need to pick up an extra running back. Pittsburgh's going to be doing the same. Cincinnati, I think they're pretty content with their running back room. I don't think there's a spot for another guy who can get significant snaps. But again, people are going to be watching the Browns because they know that the Browns have like 5 good running backs. They've churned out these good running backs year after year. And it's just they're in an interesting situation where you cannot really fathom a way that they would keep 5 running backs on the NFL roster. I mean, they kept 4 last year, and that was shocking when they did it. 5. I don't know. That's a lot. But that's just my thoughts on that. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. What do you think the Browns are going to do with these 5 running backs that they have on the roster that they seem to have plans for? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Y'all have a great day. Have a good night.